what Ukraine needs is production facilities for modern weaponry, and not for weaponry from 70 years ago. You need robots. You need ground robots, you need UAVs. And you need them in huge numbers in which Ukraine currently cannot manufacture them. So let's say the United States send you 1,000 Abrams tanks. Okay, you rearm whatever is left of your armored brigades with 1,000 Abrams tanks and send them into attack. You are going to be spent in a matter of 2 or 3 days because all of these 1,000 Abrams tanks are going to be destroyed by Russian UAVs.
How United States should prioritize military aid for Ukraine? How situation on the Russia-Ukraine front line influence American midterm election? And how Russia can escalate in NATO? All of this I am going to discuss with my guest, military analyst Tom Cooper. Thanks for being here, Tom.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Nice to be with you.
Institute for the Study of War reported that the pace of Russian advance has slowed in the beginning of the year. Institute specifies that in the beginning of December 2025, Russians were increasing their presence on the territory of almost 300 square kilometers, and in the beginning of January 2026 on almost 75 square kilometers. What does this indicate?
I'm not in agreement with this assessment. I would say that the Russian, the way they are advancing is significantly different nowadays, and the situation is not linear. So they are more into infiltration and making large parts of the area which one could define as a front line, but is actually none of that, because there is no clear front line in much of the sectors, or most of the sectors in Ukraine anymore. There is actually something like a wide gray zone, as you call it in Ukraine. This means nobody controls something like 15 kilometers on the Ukrainian side and 15 kilometers on the Russian side. There is just troop movement, mostly by the Russians, so they are trying to infiltrate, move behind and around the different of Ukrainian positions. And Ukrainians are trying to keep their positions resupplied, while the Russians are trying to keep the positions they have reached, or their survivors of their infiltrations resupplied with batteries for radios foremost, but also with food, water and ammunition. So in this regards, actually, when one checks what was going on on the different sectors, in different sectors of this war of the last week, the Russians have continued advancing. And of course, in some cases, very little, in other cases, a lot, or at least they have run some infiltrations, again, 10, 15 kilometers behind Ukrainian front lines. If you take the situation, for example, in Stepnohirsk, on the former bank of Dnipro, the Russians have outflanked the Ukrainian position along the Dnipro, advanced some 10 kilometers further north, and they are currently controlling all the venues of supply of remaining Ukrainian units in the Stepnohirsk area. Therefore, this area is going to collapse sooner or later, because the Ukrainians cannot keep it resupplied. Besides, the ZSU units deployed there are barely understaffed, undermanned. They lack troops, they lack supplies, they lack almost everything. So the situation is not rosy in these regards. And that is why I say you have a different situation than that's why my assessment is different than that of Institute of War, Study of War. Essentially, you have gradual Russian infiltrations until the area in question becomes untenable for Ukraine. Then the usual situation is that Glavkom Syrskyi and General Staff of Ukraine are doing nothing or reacting much too late. They are trying at any cost to hold the area in question, losing ever more troops in the process. And sooner or later, the area is lost, just like this has happened in Pokrovsk-Minohrad or in Hulaipole. And that is what we have in several places along the front line. That's why I say the Russian advance didn't stop or didn't slow down or anything. It just continues in a different form.
In your opinion, how our military commanders had to behave and what they had to do?
Well, principally, they would have to start reforming the entire armed forces from top to the bottom. This means remove all the generals who have no combat experience, first-hand combat experience since 2014. Also generals who are, the majority of whom are corrupt or incompetent, proven as incompetent. Secondly, you need an entirely new system of training of not only for newly recruited how should I call them, Ukrainian soldiers, but also and especially for at all levels of command. That means you have to create finally an NCO, non-commissioned officers, sergeants, corporals, and so on, corps. You have to train them so that they learn to take care of their troops. Then you have to train your officers from lieutenants up to generals to start taking care for their troops as well, to start taking care for the troops to remain alive, to be taken good care of, that it never happens again that your troops are for 160, 170 days in the same position without replacement, like this is currently regularly the case. And then after reforming or training and retraining the entire force, which would be a process lasting at least 6, probably 9 or more months, as recommended by, for example, Drapati and Bilecki already the last year, which means it could have already been, no, sorry, it was in late 2024, which means over 1 year, which means that this process could have been completed by now, but it wasn't. And so on and so on. You're turning in circles. I'm all the time explaining the same, and this is not happening. Now we have a new Minister of Defense, Fedorov, who has a good reputation as a doer, as a accomplisher, as a good manager. We are going to see what happens with him. I'm trying to hold back and patiently wait to see if something is going to happen in regards of reform of the general staff as well, because the general staff is not doing its job, which would be to study the combat experiences and constantly provide the feedback to all the officers on the front line and all the soldiers on the front line in form of simple manuals for how to do and what to do in what case, which is happening time and again, but not often enough. So therefore, the general staff is not doing its job either. Then you have a problem also with general staff in regard of logistics, where there are still too many Soviet-style, under apostrophe, Soviet-style officers who are sitting on supplies and not really providing them to the troops. And it remains extremely complex to obtain replacements in, for example, in batteries, in chargers, in power banks, in replacements for Starlink terminals, replacements even for barrels for machine guns. The officer who is responsible for loss of a machine gun has to fill five different papers, then request resupply of the barrel for machine gun. And then it takes 1 or 2 weeks for the officers in the rear to react to his request. Unsurprisingly, I say again, I'm running a small charity in this regard. So I know what are the troops demanding, and they're not receiving this from their supply system. Therefore, they are requesting it from us, and we are supplying this in a matter of week or less, at least as long as Ukra-Poshta is still working in the sector in question. So this is why I know that there are major problems with logistics, so to say. And I don't want to see how is this going on, or how is this working or not working in regards of ammunition supply, because the mass of ammunition goes where Sirski and his assault troops are. When Sirski appears in some sector of the front line, suddenly there is enough ammunition for everybody. There is enough artillery ammunition, there are enough bullets. But if he goes away, and this is usually happening on the same day, all of a sudden the resupply stops. It's the same with the troops. The mass of newly recruited, newly trained troops are going to the assault troops who are under Sirski's personal command. They are receiving up to 800 new troops a week. Other brigades are happy if they receive 30 replacement troops a week, or a month. A month, actually, not a week. So you have the same problems again, and we are going to turn around this forever unless something happens. And what is crucial, why am I talking about this so much, and why am I emphasizing this? The Russians are so incompetent that they have wasted their armed formations, their army is exhausted, tired, in terrible condition. So any improvement on the Ukrainian side would improve the situation in Ukraine. But this is simply not happening because of Syrskis and Zelensky's refusals to apply these necessary reforms. So this means if we improve the condition and capability of your armed forces, you are automatically improving the capability of these armed forces to fight, to stop the Russians, to be successful in combat. Instead of this, nothing is happening. The situation remains the same, which means Syrskis continues dissolving brigades into, at earlier times, battalions. Meanwhile, it's down to companies. He's distributing single companies from the same brigade at 5, 10 different sectors of the front line. And then wonders how comes there's no cohesion between the units, and there are massive problems with coordination between different companies and battalions and whatever is left of different brigades. Brigades are understaffed. Brigade commanders do not have an idea what is the condition of different of their battalions and companies, and so on and so on. We are turning in circles and explaining all the same things for 2 years, and nothing happens.
Mm-hmm. I have 2 questions after your speech. The first one,
please.
Actually, what is happening in Russian army? I would like you to expand your thought, because you have mentioned some issues, but I would like you expand your thought. And the second question is, you mentioned that we have, and it's actually true, tremendous trouble with mobilization. I would like you to give us a piece of advice. How could Ukraine overcome this problem?
Okay, the Russian army, first and foremost. Russian army has, this is the ironic thing, that they have everything in huge numbers. They have foremost troops. And they are constantly feeding these troops into the mid-grinder on the battlefield. They have growing problems with new mobilization of additional volunteers, and they have to refill their units regularly through actual mobilization of reservists, but they still have enough troops in grand total. Therefore, what they are doing is they're mobilizing or collecting volunteers, put them together into a regiment, send the regiment to the front line. The regiment is shot to pieces by Ukrainians, suffering losses of 80 to 90%. Survivors are sent back to after some 6 to 9 months. Survivors are withdrawn, and then the regiment is refilled. In the meantime, another regiment takes over, and this is how they continue advancing all the time and exercising pressure and those advancing. And as one of the Russians recently said to me, well, Tom, any advance is a good advance. You know, it doesn't matter whether you are advancing 10 meters or 200 meters or 2 kilometers a day or a week or a month, as long as it's an advance. It is that simple. This is all that matters to Putin. But there is still an advance, because as long as there is an advance, and there is an advance not only a Russian advance, not only in 1 or 2 sectors of the battlefield, but, excuse me, I wrote them down this morning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different sectors where the Russians are advancing the last week. Or at least infiltrating 7 to 15, sometimes 20 kilometers behind the Ukrainian lines, and destabilizing the front line. And due to lack of troops, of supplies in terms of ammunition, UAVs and so on, Ukrainians are losing control over these sectors or specific areas within sectors. So the point is this: the Russian army is exhausted, but on the other hand, it has more armored vehicles than it had in 2022, because it has used all the reserves left over from the Cold War to resupply the units with all of these old tanks, T-72s, T-80s from the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, BMPs and so on. So nowadays, the Russian army still has more armored vehicles than it used to have in 2022. That is one point. Another point is, okay, these vehicles are obsolete from modern day standards, but they are still there. And you still need a grenade or a missile for every single one of them to destroy them. And this is still 22,000 armored vehicles. Then it's similar in regards of artillery ammunition resupply. They do not have enough to run such massive artillery offensives like in summer 2022, or whether this is Popasna or Severodonetsk and Lysychansk or Bakhmut, but they are replacing this with huge numbers of UAVs. So they are finding solutions for their problems, and they got real. They have started. Even the Gen staff in Moscow has learned that it has to get real, that it has to take lessons from the battlefield seriously and operate correspondingly. Only the Gen staff in Kiev is still acting as this is no problem for it, and this is not none of its affairs. So on one side, the situation is terrible, especially infantry units on the Russian side. On the other side, the situation is stable, and they can continue advancing under apostrophes, whatever this advance is. That is the point. So they can continue fighting like this for at least 1 or 2 years longer, no problem, no major problem. The only question is whether, as so many in the West are complaining or concerned about, whether Russia could really launch some sort of an offensive invasion of any of NATO countries or any of the remaining neutral countries in Europe or not. That is the only question. This is disputable in all possible directions. So this is the Russian army. What is also in regards of Russian army, the Russian Air Force is nowadays better positioned to provide close air support for the Russian ground forces than it was in 2022. In 2022, it was still depending on imprecise and poorly directed, actually, direct attacks or airstrikes on geographic coordinates. Nowadays, it works far better in sense of having these glide bombs, the CABs, as you call them in Ukraine. I call them UMPKs. And they are launching them. And what is my major difference is that nowadays they do not even enter the envelope of Ukrainian air defenses, but they are launching their bombs from well outside of it, which in turn means the Russians are suffering next to no losses, next to no combat losses in terms of aircraft and crews. Back in 2022, they have suffered severe losses in this regards. So there's a fundamental difference nowadays. Nowadays they can do much more with less aircraft, which is important because Russian Air Force has also diminished in total size. They do not have the same number of operational aircraft like they used to have in 2022. The next point is that Russia has adjusted its production of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, improved it through clandestine import of Western electronics, of course, but still, nevertheless, so they are much better in this regards than they used to be in 2022. In 2022, they have spent their original stocks of cruise missiles and ballistic missiles for actually very little gain. Nowadays, we see how effectively they can deploy them. They have learned also how to deploy them in combination. At earlier times, they would haphazardly shoot at all the different places in Ukraine which were of their interest, or supposedly of their interest, or somebody told them that they are of their interest, but they were not effective in grand total. Nowadays, they have, as you have said, in introduction, they have knocked out much of Ukraine's power supply. The country is freezing without electricity, without water, without heating. So this improved effectiveness of the Russian armed forces, but they are much better now than they used to be 4 years ago. So that is the Russians. As for
Ukrainian mobilization.
Yeah. My opinion is, my assessment is that you are facing a war of extermination. Putin is after nothing else but destruction of Ukraine. And not only destruction of Ukraine, but destruction of the idea that Ukraine exists as a sovereign country. Not to talk about a nation. For him, there is no Ukrainian nation. And he's going to do everything in his powers to short of deploy nuclear weapons so far, to realize this aim. Therefore, all of you Ukrainians are threatened with extinction, with extermination. And then, when I think of this, after 4 years of war, not to have general mobilization, well, I cannot but wonder, what is your president doing? What is he thinking? It appears, or actually meanwhile it's more or less proven, as a matter of fact, that Zelensky is convinced he's constantly fighting some sort of presidential election campaign, not a war. And this is the crucial problem. He is not taking any kind of unpopular steps, which would be general mobilization. So to have enough workers to, for example, enable the Ukroželeznica to repair damaged sections of the railways, to enable the energy sector to repair damaged facilities or to fortify them better, which didn't happen over the last 1.5 years at all, which would also bring additional troops to the ZSU. You have to launch this general mobilization not only because this would bolster your workforce and your fighting force, but because you have to involve all the Ukrainians in their fight for survival, which is currently not the case. If you are rich enough, young enough, old enough, or whatever, you don't need to care about this war. It's not your problem. So he's disuniting the society as well. And this on account of, oh gosh, this is an unpopular measure, we can't do that. That is your crucial problem. And once you solve this problem, one way or the other, you are likely to solve all the other problems as well. But you need to do this in a coordinated fashion, because if you introduce general mobilization, you also need a complete reform of your general staff and your doctrine and strategy. And this is unlikely to happen because Zelensky's strategy is, I'm fighting for re-election, not fighting a Russian war of extermination. That's what I have to say in this regards.
Mm-hmm. Given the current state of the Ukrainian front line, what are the most critical tactical shifts you anticipate in the next 6 to 12 months, and how might they affect American military support priorities?
But they're not going to affect American support at all, as long as Trump is in power, because he can't care less about Ukraine. It's as simple as that. For him, Ukraine is at most a burden, preventing him from entering the open cooperation with Putin, with his body. So that is, sorry, this is sort of irrelevant. He's not going to change the means of supply or what is he supplying to Ukraine because of some shifts on the front line. As for these shifts on the front line, it's simple. The Russians are going to continue pushing in direction of Zaporozhye and Dnipro primarily. And then you have, I forgot the name of the town. It's between Dnipro and the current front line. They are going to continue pushing in that direction. That is the southern sector. And then you have Liman is currently a major crisis for the ZSU. And the Russians are infiltrating along its eastern and southeastern in direction of southern side of Liman, and they have knocked out, their air force has knocked out all the bridges over the Svetsky Donetsk, which means the ZSU has a growing problem with keeping the front line at Liman resupplied with troops and with reinforcements and supplies. You have a major problem also insofar that you can't, or your political and military leadership are obsessed with this idea of no step back. Correspondingly, in Konstantinovka and in, what's the name, Alexandrivka, they are holding, they must hold this position. They are not withdrawing. So instead of shortening the front line and saving some troops to establish reserves, no, they are wasting time. They're wasting troops and letting these troops get infiltrated and then encircled and destroyed by the Russians is the same in Stepnohirsk area, which I've described earlier. I said again, Ukraine needs to declare general mobilization, and its president must realize he's facing a war of extermination, not some election campaign. He's not fighting an election campaign. Similarly, I do not understand, and this is really a shame, that somebody like Syrski is establishing de facto his own militia in form of assault troops. This is something that is making me furious in the middle of the war. And these assault troops, these 6 battalions, and then receiving all, or the mass of all the armament that is still, as far as this is still delivered from the West, and I'm talking about heavy armament, top class of equipment like M1 Abrams tanks and Bradley armored infantry vehicles. And what happens? They're wasting them for nothing, for recovering lost positions, flashy telegenic operations, which are then used to distribute propaganda in the social media and win likes. This is what Zelensky and Syrski think is fighting a war, wasting troops, dozens of troops, to plant a Ukrainian flag on some municipal building in a village which was lost already 2 months ago.
But as you mentioned before, any advance is a good advance.
That is for Russians.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, after all these flashy Ukrainian counterattacks run by Syrskyi's toy soldiers, which is his assault troops, what happens? Nothing. The place is lost. He counterattacks, re-establishes position, recovers position, plants Ukrainian flag. Afterwards, the Russians come over, kill everybody who was involved in the counterattack. No problem. 800 troops, additional troops to do assault troops today. Replace them, replace the M1s, whatever we've got from Australia or whoever else. Replace the Bradleys, as long as there are any. No problem, and let's do the same again. And this is repeated same again and again and again already for 1 year.
You are talking about
troops of Ukraine.
You are talking about Kupiansk.
I'm talking, assault troops are next to non-present in Kupiansk area. I'm talking about...
When you told us about flag.
They are north of Pokrovsk, they are north of Mirnogorod. One battalion was now moved to Hulaipole area. This is the area I'm talking about. But foremost, Pokrovsk and Mirnogorod. The two towns were lost for Ukraine already in November. But no, in order to get great news for Ukraine, Syrsky is continuing to counterattack there and stage PR operations, actually, with terrible consequences for involved troops. And I'm sadly, part of my job is to review all the possible videos the Russians are releasing. And what they have released in the last 2-3 weeks is, grisly videos of bodies of dozens of Ukrainian troops, all with flags in their backpacks, sent by Syrsky and spent as toy soldiers to plant a flag on that building in Mirnogorod or Pokrovsk. For what purpose? You are not controlling these two towns. You have lost them. At most, you can keep the Russians away from continuing to advance further north and further west. That is the most they have achieved. 20 of special forces operators from Budanov's GUR. What happened with that? Heliborne counteroffensive by Ukrainian armed forces, blah, 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 blah. They landed to recover a single petrol station. They're all killed by the Russians, foremost by Russian UAVs. Nobody's talking about this fact, that they have all been killed, and that the recovery of that petrol station was of temporary nature, several hours at most. So what are you training these special forces operators to waste them in a propaganda operation? What for? Does anybody in Ukraine care about their families, their wives, their daughters, sons, their fathers, their mothers? Nobody, obviously. They are simply wasted for nothing. This is what I'm talking about.
We also understand that Ukraine, unfortunately, is not Trump's administration priority. But anyway, I would like to ask you, let's imagine when it comes to current period of war, what American weapon would become a game changer in this war, on the front line and beyond?
Actually not, because what Ukraine needs is production facilities for modern weaponry, and not for weaponry from 70 years ago. You need robots, you need ground robots, you need UAVs, and you need them in huge numbers, in which Ukraine currently cannot manufacture them. So let's say the United States send you 1,000 Abrams tanks. Okay, you rearm whatever is left of your armored brigades with 1,000 Abrams tanks and send them into attack. You are going to be spent in a matter of 2 or 3 days because all these 1,000 Abrams tanks are going to be destroyed by Russian UAVs. So what you need is a clever strategy in terms of establishing production facilities, working this up. For this you need the workforce, which you don't have because you didn't launch a general mobilization.
Okay, I gotcha.
So, as simple as that.
How would you assess the effectiveness of Ukrainian air defense network so far? And where are the remaining gaps that the US and its allies should address to deter future air and ballistic threats?
You're talking about air war over Ukraine, and you mentioned gaps. You have lots of gaps. You have only gaps in your air defense. Why? Because you don't have enough armament and not enough personnel, trained, experienced, combat-capable, skilled personnel to close all of these gaps. And you cannot, you are such an underdog in terms of firepower that you even if you would have enough in weaponry, you couldn't establish a solid air defense shield over Ukraine. Why? Because the Russians would only have it easier to find and kill it.
Yeah, but sorry, we are
defense,
destroying a lot of Shaheds, a lot of missiles.
I'm getting there. Please be patient. And explaining what, look, the air warfare is a highly technical issue. You cannot explain to your viewers, oh, we have got five sky shields, now we are safe from Ukrainian missiles. You're not, because the sky shields are covering an area of 3 by 3 kilometers. In Ukraine, as far as I recall, or the last I checked on the map, is some 1,500 kilometers wide and 1,000 something kilometers tall. So how do you want to defend all of this with five sky shields? So I'm trying to explain you the complexity of the entire situation. It is highly technical. If you don't understand it, you're never going to comprehend what is going on. So you have a radar system that is the core of your air defense system. This is covering all of the Ukrainian sky. And not only all of the Ukrainian sky, but looking also well into Russian aerospace. No problem about this. But in terms of, a radar network is not the same like air defense network. Air defense network consists of surface-to-air missiles, of long-range surface-to-air missiles, then you have medium-range surface-to-air missiles, then you have short-range air defense systems, ground-based air defense systems. In addition to this onion consisting of so you have long-range, medium-range, short-range. In addition, in front of that long-range, you have airborne interceptors, which is F-16s, Mirages, and then a shorter range, you have helicopters. So this is great. Theoretically fantastic. The problem is you have so few surface-to-air missiles, meanwhile, whether long-range, medium-range, or short-range, that the mass of your surface-to-air missile systems are sitting idle because they do not have the ammunition to continue fighting. Therefore, what your air defense system is doing is to protecting just some 10, 15 specific urban and economic zones in Ukraine. So these 10 or 15 zones, or cities, actually, they are very easy to outflank. Why? Because you cannot move your ground-based air defense system at the speed of not even the UAVs, not to talk about cruise missiles or ballistic missiles or hypersonic missiles. Which in turn means that the Russians have it relatively easy to find out which of your cities is well protected this day and to strike something else. And if nothing else, if they have to strike something that is well protected today, let's say Kryvyi Rih, we have seen this a few days ago, then they have it easy to overpower this air defense system by saturating it with a huge number of UAVs. And as these UAVs approach the city or the target, they combine it with cruise missiles, which are faster than UAVs. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, towards the end of this attack, at the high point of this attack by UAVs and cruise missiles, they combine ballistic missiles. So your air defenses, for example, of Kryvyi Rih, then sit there, shoot at UAVs. Oh, wait, cruise missiles are coming from this direction, ballistic missiles from this direction, and hypersonic missiles from that direction. So now try to defend yourself from this. Mm-hmm. You can't. Something is going to get through, and this is what has happened in Kryvyi Rih, and not only once, but 2 or 3 times the last week or so. So this is just one example. We can repeat this example in Kiev. We can repeat this example. It's not even necessary because the situation further east is only worse, whether it's Poltava or Kramatorsk, not to talk about Kramatorsk, Chernihiv, Sumy, it's everywhere the same. And the further west it goes, it's the same. It's again, you have to keep the mass of your air defense forces busy with protection of Lviv and similar places in the west, because there's also under severe pressure from the Russian airstrikes, UAV strikes, and ballistic missile strikes. So again, ideally, you would have enough firepower and enough security to build actually a wall somewhere behind the front line and say, okay, whatever comes our way, we are shooting it down already here, somewhere along the front line or immediately behind the front line, instead of waiting for all of these hundreds of UAVs, dozens of cruise missiles on top of, and then toppled completed by ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles, only when they are already next to us, when they are close to us. So when you talk about gaps, you have nothing but gaps in your air defense force, air defense system, because you're just protecting specific points of interest. In between, there are huge gaps. And then you can see there are several monitoring, let's say, agencies in Ukraine, private agencies, if you like. Private people who are tracking the movement of Russian attack UAVs during the night. And you see them waving along long routes through Ukrainian airspace. What are they doing? They're sending these UAVs into your airspace, and they are mapping the positions of Ukrainian air defenses in this fashion. Because once you detect the approach of dozens of UAVs, you cannot ignore them. You have to power up your radars. The moment you power up your radars, you are exposing your position. The Russians know where your radars are and therefore can assess where your air defenses are. Why is this important? Because after every such engagement, you are moving your radars. You redeploy them into a new position. Sometimes 500 meters, other times 5 or 50 kilometers. But it's enough to move it. And the Russians have already lost the situational awareness. But for the efficiency of their strikes, they have to have full situational awareness. So they are obtaining this situational awareness through mapping the position of your radars, of your air defense systems. This is what is happening every single night over Ukraine. So they are now meandering these UAVs, routing them in between your cities, forcing you to power up your radars, your air defense systems, sometimes also flying the UAVs and cruise missiles around their actual targets. For example, they appear like they are going for Lviv, but turn around and fly to Kiev. And this way, you are always forced to operate, to activate your air defenses. The moment you activate them, the Russians can track their positions. And to constant, persistent tracking of these positions, they know, this regiment and its patriots is in Kiev area, this regiment and its patriots is in Odessa area, this is somewhere else, this Nasam's regiment is here, and so on and so on. They have it perfectly easy. And correspondingly, they can always seek for the weak spots, for points which are not well enough protected. And this is why this air defense system, as it is right now, cannot work. And it's not going to work unless there is a production of some 15,000 interceptor SAMs, missiles, a month in the EU or in Ukraine, and it's not going to work any better unless there is a production of some 50,000 interceptor UAVs in Ukraine and the West. And we are very, very far away from this situation. Even more so because your general staff and your Minister of Defense are still, or at least, I said, I'm not going to attack Fedorov or criticize him, it's too early, but general staff of Ukraine and the Ministry of Defense. So, I know somebody there, not just one person involved. I contact him. Listen, I have here a company from this and that country. They have a very effective design of UAV interceptor, which is itself a UAV. You launch it. It is fast enough to catch a Geran and shoot it down. It would, projected cost is something like $4,000 per round, per intercept. What shall we do? How shall they approach you? Here's the project. PDF. What else do you want? What do you need in order to get in touch with them and to discuss possible production? No response.
Yeah, but Tom.
Absolutely good.
Yeah, Tom. In general, is it theoretically possible to cover huge territory of Ukraine, all territory? Because we are, as you know, the biggest country in Europe.
Yes, it is. Why not?
It's possible,
you build up. Look, theoretically it is possible, but you need the industrial capability to do so. You need the strategy and resulting planning. You need somebody in charge who says, okay, I'm not fighting now an election campaign, but I'm facing a war of extermination. For this, I need production capabilities. For production capabilities, I need workers. I need to train these workers for a schooling system, and I need energy supply. Right now, your glorious president has forgotten to check what are his own aides doing with the fortification of the power supply, and what is the result of this? Power supply is destroyed. So even if you declare a general mobilization, the most you could do now would be to send thousands of workers to start fortifying a destroyed power supply, which is going to take at least 6 to 9 months of extensive help by the West, all provided this West is conscious enough to organize such a help, which it is not after 4 years. It is still not understanding this war. And then to recover the power supply. So you can hope that through the summer, your president might this time not forget about fortifying and recovering the power supply or the power network so that you are better prepared for the next winter. Right now, I don't see this happening, but we are going to see.
Tom, I would like to talk to you about NATO countries, not only about Ukraine. Looking ahead, how could Russia escalate in NATO and under what conditions, in your opinion?
Russia has already escalated its war against NATO. It's just not a classic conventional war in terms of we are now invading with huge armies and
we are talking about hybrid war, yeah.
It is a hybrid war that is already going on. We are talking about hundreds of attacks on different installations around NATO. And if not by Russian forces, and not by Russian intelligence services, then by surrogates or proxies, so-called proxies nowadays. That means they, for example, it's a theory of mine, if you like, but let's say there is a leftist extremist group in Germany. Okay, guys, there comes some very nice, friendly gentleman and tells them, listen, why don't you attack this system in the power supply and then knock out the power supply of large parts of Berlin for Christmas and the New Year. That's how you do it nowadays. And this is what is going on. You have this shadow fleet. Shadow fleet is all the time streaming from the Baltic along Denmark and Germany and UK and France and so on into the Atlantic. From time to time, some of these ships are equipped with UAVs. They launch UAVs. These attack some specific area in Germany. Germans are upset, but nobody is permitted to open fire because you're not opening fire. We are not at war, and therefore this is a civilian airspace. We cannot shoot as we like in the civilian airspace, and so on and so on. This is happening all the time. Somebody 3 years ago has knocked out the major part of the refinery in Schwechat outside of Vienna. Austria was suffering for months from shortages of specific fuels. No, it was just an explosion. We are not at war. It can't be Russians. We are not going to talk about this because this is inconvenient. Besides, our oligarchy is still interested in cooperating with Putin. Therefore, we cannot blame Putin for attacking Austria. This is what is going on. Just ignore the reality. Don't take it seriously. And no, we are not at war. But while Russia is already at war with us. That is a matter of fact. So when you ask how and what to do, well, the West would have to finally get serious about what is it doing. But you cannot expect this from the same president and chancellors who are ignoring the reality for already not only 4 years, but meanwhile it's 12 years since Russian invasion of Ukraine. So what do you expect from the same people to get serious now, to get real now? This is not going to happen anytime soon.
How could Russia use these conditions that have you mentioned about Europe?
No, it's already doing that. It is using them excellently for propaganda purposes, for convincing larger parts of our populations here that Russia is a well-meant country that came under aggression of NATO, that NATO is expanding on its own because for its own interest, not for the interest of some, who cares about some countries that want to join NATO. NATO, that's nothing important, that we are aggressive here in the West, that we are warmongers, or at least ruled by warmongers, that our system is rotten and falling apart, and so on and so on. So this is what is Russia already doing, and highly successful at that. You have entire political parties in Germany, in Austria, in France, in Italy, and so on, who are running election campaigns based on this premise. You have the President of the United States repeating such statements almost word by word. So, I mean, sorry, I don't see the Russians getting even more effective in this regard. It can't get better from their point of view. We remain disunited, we remain run or administered by incompetent, corrupt idiots. And from Putin's point of view, everything is fine. He can go on like this forever, no problem.
Yeah, Tom, and my last question is, how do you see future global security architecture in Europe?
Well, we will have to reorganize NATO for the start and organize something that is really European and not American dominated, because well, it should be clear even to sparrows on my roof by now that one cannot depend on the United States. That is the first point. And with this, I've said actually everything that there is to say in this regards. Out with any kind of US bases out of here, they must go. Intelligence bases even more so, because the United States are still collecting huge volumes of intelligence about Europe first and foremost, not about any kind of US enemies in Europe. That is the problem one. For this, we would need huge volumes of political courage, which we don't have right now. We would need people who can see further behind the next elections, whether these are in 6 months or in 6 years. We would have to admit several very unpleasant truths, like that lots of our governments have screwed up over the last 20, 30 years. We're celebrating an endless party, usually with help of Russian gas and oil, which were very cheap. But that these times are over and we have to reorganize ourselves, and so on and so on. I mean, we need such a volume of reforms. We need better schooling systems, education systems. We need better health systems and so on. But this is not going to happen, because we are dominated currently by the very same ideology, which is, no, give the super rich even more money, so they are going to get the economy, into working gear, and everything is going to be easier that way. They're going to reinvest this money into economy, so therefore they are going to create additional jobs, and everything is then going to be fine. No, it's not working. It didn't work in the 1930s, in the 1940s. It is not working now either. So we actually need people like Roosevelt was back then in 1932, 1933. We need people which we do not have. It's as simple as that.
Tom, thank you very much for this discussion, and goodbye.
Thank you also. All the best for all of you, and I hope you can keep yourself as warm as possible these days.
Thank you.